Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting on July 13th.
Hey, we want to add an agenda item that we should discuss first because Hide has to jump early from the call. And we would like to discuss the roadmap and what's next for the next milestone, which is Helm GA, making the Helm-related APIs general available and releasing Helm Controller 1.0.0. So I'll let Hide give us an overview of what was the plan for Helm Controller, and then we can discuss Source Controller with Sani, Sanskar, and others.
Yeah, I can give a brief overview of what's planned. For the past months, I've been working on rewriting the Helm controller as much as I could within the available time. That means that actually most of the logic backing it has already been rewritten. Sunny just approved the PR, which basically finalizes the whole kind of sub-reconciliation flow around translating a Helm release API object to running a Helm action just using the API object, and then another kind of bit of wrapping code which does parts which a reconciler of a controller would normally do. So that means that, for example, it runs an upgrade and then it takes note in the status of the result of the upgrade. The mechanics around it compared to the current controller have changed a lot. To provide a very brief overview of what the controller currently does, it basically runs an action, then it waits for Helm to have finalized the action, and then it does a combination of looking at the return value from Helm, and it retrieves the object from the storage and takes a look at the state of the object from the storage. There's a couple of problems. One of them is the Helm not being very nice in what it returns. Sometimes it may return a release object, sometimes it may not return a release object, sometimes it may return an error which doesn't make it apparent of what actually was the failure, and well, a variety of other things. The new model does observations on writes to the storage. So by wrapping the Helm storage, we can directly see while we're in the action that something has been persisted to the storage or not, instead of relying on Helm actually returning the truth to us. That also gives us a couple of advantages in terms of what we can do within the status object of the Helm release object itself. For example, it's possible to do a realistic real-time reflection of the last state persisted to the storage, that being also like information around, hey, I triggered test hooks. What are the results of those test hooks? That's one example. The other thing is like doing like accurate representation of like the stuff you would get using Helm get normally. So the amount of time a user has to spend with the Helm CLI to get things forward or represented will be reduced, and it will also be much easier for both Kubectl users, but also for like UI things like the Weaver's UI to provide an overview of what happened to the Helm release, not just from the perspective of the Helm release object itself, but also from the perspective of, hey, what's actually present in the Helm storage, and what jobs did run, what was the previous release that is deployed, because the other thing that it does is that it keeps track of not just the current state, but also the previous state for the release version before that. So not the previous state that was written, but the previous release object.
Nice. I have some questions about tests. Should I ask now or?
I want to give a quick overview on how I think that we move forward towards V1 API, and then we can have room for further questions. So because the changes are quite broad, and in terms of spec definitions, they are fully backwards compatible. But if you look at the status API object, there are many changes. also in terms of how we keep rolling forward from the V2 beta 1 to the V2 beta 2, I think may require manual changes if someone doesn't want to do an upgrade to basically get the state in the right state to further continue with the new model. I have some ideas around how we can kind of facilitate for users to say like, okay, I trust that this release is in the right state. So just copy the current state and live with it, and then continue to move forward if you notice any divergences based on the spec. But given those changes, I think it would be best if we first roll a V2 beta 2 before we move to a proper V2. So we said V1, but it's actually V2. Just due to the immense amount of changes and rolling from a V2 beta 1 to a V2 directly with these number of changes makes me uncomfortable. The other thing is that due to the big number of changes in the API, I think it's better to have a testing bed, which is pre-major releases basically, and then non-release candidates, than having a series of release candidates. Also because what we have seen from user behavior is that they sometimes don't pick up release candidates, and that gives you less of a group of testers basically. So yeah. Then in terms of where we are at the moment, as I said, all the backend code has been written. It just hasn't been wired up to a controller yet. I have code on my machine that wires it together, but hasn't been polished in terms of just the nice things, logging in the proper places, some edge case scenarios around when to reset the failure accounts, etc. But it's all taking shape. I expect that sometime at the end of next week, I will probably have a PR which is not fully polished, but at least gives you something to try it out in terms of being able to put
on the dev branch, right?
Yeah, it will continue to be in the dev branch until we have kind of a base in which we are certain that within like 1 or 2 weeks time we can move forward with an actual release.
And the API bump will happen in the dev branch for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I did while I wrote it was that I basically already created the V2 Beta 2 API model, but then I wired things up to still go through the V2 Beta 1 storage version. So the old controller basically continued to work. And then what I did was I basically started writing it from the bottom. So I first started writing the action packages to do the translation from the V2 Beta 1 API object. Then I started to do the sub-reconcilers, which are detached from any real reconciliation model. So I could just work with a new API object, test it, and then mock it with like fake things and see if it worked as expected. And in my local branch, I've now moved the storage version to the new one. And I'm actually changing the reconciler, which hooks into the control runtime manager to work with the new API version. So everything is kind of prepared, but built up in such a way that like the switching storage version could be delayed until I was at this stage.
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused about the release plan. So let's say we get the V2 beta 2, the reconciler, everything in shape in the dev branch.
Mm-hmm.
What's next from there? Are we going to merge the dev branch into main and release Helm controller version 1.0.0 release candidate 1 and ship that as Flux 2.1.0 release candidate 1 and iterate with release
No,
or
I think it would be best to release a new 0 point minor with the V2 Beta 2 API, and then aim for the V2 API to be to not include any changes, but basically so it should be frictionless, right? So it should be possible to be like, okay, just bump the API version. Everything is already working with the new model. There are no changes. other than just making it the official kind of thing. But I think that's the best option.
Okay,
In that
are we
regard.
going to support upgrades from V2 Beta 1 Helm release straight to V2 Helm release, or people will have to the
No, it should be possible to do that.
okay. So basically the goal with the beta 2 release is to find all the edge cases for upgrades, and then V2 will be just we stamp this and this is ready, everybody can upgrade and with no issues, correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So we are going to do a Flux 2.1.0 that comes with a new beta API of Helm release.
Yes.
Okay. Do you still have time?
Yeah, I have like another 15 minutes or something.
Okay. I have some questions around behavioral changes and improvements for the V2 beta 2 API. And I'm going to state what I think those are, and you can then deny it or prove it or whatever. So my understanding is that we are going to have logs for Helm errors, like a Helm test error, a Helm upgrade error, and so on. Those will not be only in events. Yes or no?
Oh, very good question. I think no, we are not going to have those. We are going to have a logtail summary in an event, and we are going to have the summarization of tests within the status of the how many object. So you can see like, okay, this is the list of test hooks that triggered, and this is the one that failed, and then you manually have to look it up. One of the reasons that it works like this is that once Helm runs into the first test error, I think, it actually stops looking at everything. So you can't accumulate any of you can't do a full accumulation of all the information because your process stops.
Okay, but we do tell people which test failed, so then they can do.
Yeah, that's the whole goal. The whole goal is to give you precise pointers about where you need to look for information.
Okay. Also on logs. So right now, if you create a Helm release, and let's say you have something in the values, or you have something in your cluster which is not compatible with the default values. Let's take the easy one, like you want to install Ingress and Nginx, but you have no load balancer support. Compared to Helm install, the Flux install fails because we wait for it, then we basically delete the release and everything. And for right now, what we have in the docs for people to debug such a thing and find out the actual Helm wait error, which is timeout for ingress, load balancer, IP not found or whatever. You couldn't see that in the Helm controller logs. You had to, you could only see that in events. There were like the logging will say release failed, rollback. Did that change? Do we now persist in logs the same waiting errors as we do for events?
Not sure. I
was
mean,
thinking that with the refactoring now, we don't take decisions for the users, and if we write an event, we also write a log with it. So people that don't look at events, don't have long-term storage for events, but they do have all these things for logs, they will get the same feedback from Flux.
yeah, they still can, right? Because if you set log level to debug, the event emitter will actually log what events it pushes. But I can change the log level, but the problem is that setting the usefulness of the, like, what you do is that you give Helm, you give it a logger, and then you decide at what level that logger logs. The experience is that if you configure it to just log everything into an info logger, a level logger, basically, the amount of logs you get is excessive. Then, yeah, but then if you
wait a second. My understanding is that what we are doing now with events, we collect the logs, we deduplicate the logs. So you don't see an event waiting for ingress, or waiting for service,
yeah, we do the duplication, I guess.
Yeah, and we put that into an event. An event is way limited at what the log size is. So if those fit into an event, can we, in case of errors, so this is about errors and debugging of errors. In case of an error, can we log with the log level error, the failure of waiting like we do for events? Because for events, we do this, right? We set it on warning and we fire it up. Can we also do a log error of the same stuff? Not forwarding the whole Helm logging, but do the same logic that we do now with deduplication, but also persist to the logs.
I could make that work, yes.
Okay. I think that's an important thing to get for GA, as in have consistency around debugging. So
I would like to ask you then that once I have the PR up, which wires the controller together with the current logic, to try it out, because like the polishing of these things is still on my list. I put in all the things so that I can put things in place in places where you may need them, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, this may be required here, or this may be required here, or from a user perspective, this may be better. Like, I just put the instruments in place to be able to do it, but without further thinking about the full UX journey. I can also see, for example, that I changed the logger level back to info in my thing, while I removed it in a recent commit to main, like a couple releases back. So like the whole truth around logging and observability is something that still needs polishing, but I at least put everything in place to be able to do it at the right levels and to be able to kind of push it forward to the user. So if you can give it a try as soon as it's up, and provide any feedback, then I will make sure to incorporate it.
Okay, great. I'm done with the logging events. Next question is around storage locking.
That's solved.
That's solved. So we have a proper way of unlocking now.
With the new mechanism, we can for sure say that we left the object in that state if we exited it, and if we detect that and we detect that it's locked, then we unlock it. There's specific action for it.
Awesome. Okay, so that's done. That's great. What about out of memory watcher? Do we want to leave that as experimental opt-in, or we want to change it in any way, enable it by default, or you have any thoughts on that, or you are okay with how it is now?
I think the library by itself is useful, specifically because with the stuff we're doing, we have very little control over, well, what the chart kind of does with the memory of the containers running in. Enabling by default with unlocking set, with unlocking set, I'm not sure yet. It's kind of harmless, but at the same time, it does involve kind of specifics around tweaking your remediation configuration, because when it unlocks, it force writes it to a failed release. So that means that once the model tries to determine again what it needs to do, it sees a failed release based on which it will start doing something or will not start doing something, depending on the reconciliation strategy or the remediation strategy. So I would leave it opt-in for now, because it has implications on how the spec is being put to use.
Okay, that's fine with me. But we will leave it in place, yeah, and it will work the same as we have it today documented, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What about drift detection? Do we want in V2 beta 2 to add drift detection and correction as a field in the API, or we leave it as a flag for now?
I want to make it a field in the API, I think, and I want to make it nested, because I think the only way to work around the awkwardness of certain things triggering false things is to be able to configure it on object level and then provide some means through the API to kind of be like, well, if it's this or that, then just ignore it. So that means that adding it to the API would be best. Also, because I still continue to think that drift detection enabled by default with the model we have, which doesn't rely on templating but fully relies on how mechanics, is basically a very careful consideration you have to make per object. But yeah, that's how I'm looking at things, basically.
Yeah, I agree. We can't enable it by default, but I think we should give people more fine-grained control over it and add it to the API spec. I don't think it should be under, you mean you want to put it under upgrade and not at the top level, or?
No, I want to add, say, like, without leaving the execute, like, I'm not sure about the exit name, but say you would have spec.drift.enable, and then because it's or drift detection, I don't know, because it's under drift nest under drift detection, you both have the enable field there, and then you have an option to in the future be like add an ignore field, and then it's bundled as like one configuration option. Otherwise, you would add like drift detection false to the root of the spec, and then later on, if you want to add more things or you want to give more fine-grained control, you suddenly have like this problem of
it's like
things.
in customized controller, where we have in the customization where we have prune true, and then any other option like ignore something or whatever had to be done through annotations because there was no place there to expand on the spec. So yeah, I agree. We just need to decide on what's the top level item, if it's drift correction or however is it called. Yeah, and so besides that, besides an opt-in in the spec, do we want to, are we going to ship any things around drift diff output besides what we have now with the logs?
Yeah, I'm still, it's, I think that the best option to kind of provide this functionality is to have a likewise command in the Flux CLI. Because I see with what I've seen that charts, or specifically community charts, can generate in Drift, for example, like the Prometheus stack, is that it will very quickly end up in like 100 lines of just diffs without you doing really anything. It's just like, oh, this is a structural problem in a chart, and now it applies to every object. Is that you can put it nicely in events, you can put it nicely in logs, you can't you can't even create nice notifications for it. Like it's I see very little options with the current means we also have with the notification controller, where like templating and stuff isn't really there. So I think if you have most of the drift problems you have, if they are persistent, then for debugging purposes, it would be nice if the CLI can replicate it. If it's a correction that isn't because of your chart being wrong, yeah, I'm not sure about how you can push it forward at present. Like it's going to be very difficult. It was there, but now it no longer is. Basically, if it was a user changing things once.
Yeah, no. So Flux Diff Helm release is right now the most requested feature, let's say, in an open issue. Right. So my question is, do we want the Flux Diff Helm release in the shipped along with Helm release v1, or this needs way more extra work because we need to put
No, it shouldn't, because the way I have written things to be is that you can. The only problem is that the action package is an internal, but the way things are layered is that you have an action package that's just responsible for doing the translation from the Helm release object to, I think, the controller wants to do. But then the reconciliation model is wrapped around that. So if you want to run a diff without doing the logic around statuses or other things that only a controller does, you can just use the action package. So if the controller is able to make the diff using the actions package, the CLI can also use that action package to do the same thing, but then do CLI stuff with the output. So it shouldn't be much more work, except of course that
moving actions to Flux package, right, to make it public.
Yeah, and the fact that like that's one of the things I'm still on the fence about. Like I think the server-side apply diff thing is wrapped in some nice, pretty printer kind of thing, which I couldn't use in the controller. So what I probably need to do, I still need to move the diff function, by the way, because it's glued into the controller code at present. So I had to figure out how to move it there. But what I think I'm going to do is that the diff action will return the blob of object, just like the SHA diff package does. So you give it the Helm release, you give it your new values, you give it your chart. Those are also all available on the user's local machine, or they can fetch it from some other place that has a newer chart version. And then, just like the server-side apply library, it will provide you with the old versus the new objects. So then the user of the function can decide, am I a controller or am I a CLI? I need to now compare those and do some pretty printing or whatever, but the action itself just provides you with raw data. And then
I think that's what we need, right? Because that's how you build Flux diff customization. You get the actual YAMLs, then the CLI does a different thing with Diffie and all of that, right?
Yeah, probably, but not really at the same time, I think, because I looked at it when I wrote the bit of div code that's in the controller now, and it was a bit different, I think. But you may be right. I think the core of the thing is still that it uses the server-side apply. No, what I had to do was I wrote the server-side apply, or I used the server-side apply dry run kind of thing, I think. And then I replicated the model that div has to loop through it, but then do it in the way the controller wanted. So I need one abstraction on top of that now to basically just provide the objects back. I think I discussed it with you that it was weird that it wasn't in the SSA library. So it may be an option to move that to the SSA library and make both make use of it.
Yeah, I remember now. Right. So
yeah, go ahead.
we should improve the SSA div,
Yeah, to be more
then move actions, and then only with div and actions the CLI should be able to do everything without moving any other bits from the controller.
Yeah. Then there is one other behavioral change that I think is worth taking note of, and that's the fact that it's no longer doing things in a procedural manner. So at present, like the controller, if it crashes or it does something else, then it starts all over again. The new model will know where it left off. So if you do an upgrade and the controller crashes, but it left the whole storage in a clean state, and you have tests enabled, then as soon as the reconciliation kicks in, it knows that it already did the release, so it will start doing the tests, which is like a massive improvement because of a variety of things that can go wrong in the controller's lifecycle, or even if it gets moved and it kind of stops. Also, if the context receives a shutdown signal, it will stop after it ran the last Helm action that it was determined to do. The controller will shut down, and then it will still boot up again cleanly, and it will continue with the next thing that it was designed to do. So altogether, that gives you a lot of options. That also gives you a couple of options for the future. I've talked to people, for example, that only want upgrades. So they don't want to do rollbacks. Their whole thing is basically like, oh, if it fails, just try it again, try it again, try it again. Like they just want it as kind of a packaging solution, but with jobs, right? Because that's the thing they want from Helm. They want the jobs to run, and they want to have their hook kind of mechanism, because that's the way a certain applications still need to work. So with this, it would be very easy to be like, oh, I have another kind of configuration option that doesn't do this atomic kind of reconciliation model, but it's just an try upgrade model or an install upgrade test model or whatever. That's one option. Then the second thing, the atomic reconciliation has an interface in which it can decide if it must continue with the next action or if it must stop after running an action. And at present, if it runs into an action type that it has already done, like I've done an upgrade already, and I can't do an upgrade twice, then it stops the reconciliation loop, requeues, and tries an upgrade again the next time. If it already has done a remediation, it doesn't try it again, etc., etc. So what this would allow you to do is be like, well, I have this remediation model set up that is infinite, but it gives you 5 retries. Just retry it 5 times until you run out of retries, and then stop the whole job, which is another way of kind of being able to control how your releases flow and what's blocking and what's not, which is all like quite easy to add now.
Can we add the force Boolean flag to Flux reconcile Helm release? Like so many.
Oh, that's another thing. That's an annotation concept I have. I want to introduce 2 new annotations. One is a force one, which is set together with the reconcile annotation, and it forces one retry through. So say you are out of retries, but you wanted to try it one last time, and you add that annotation together with the reconciliation request, it will try it once. Then there is a second annotation I have in mind, which is a reset annotation. So at present, once you're out of failures, you need to be like, oh, I need to change the state of the object. But most of the time, you don't want to change the state of the object. You just want to try it again. So the hack people have been using right now is a suspend resume model, because if you put a boolean in the object and then make it false again, then the generation of the object increases, and the failure count gets reset, which is like a very hacky way around the model of suspend and resume, and also kind of a blind gap in this thing triggering the generation up. I think looking back at it, we should have made suspend an annotation and not a Boolean value, because an annotation doesn't increase the generation. So it's not a state change. Yeah, but that's talking like 2 or 3 years later after we introduce it. But I want to add a reset kind of thing, which just resets the further counts by doing the annotation, and then it allows you to kind of continue cleanly and kick off the whole remediation retry counter again.
Okay, so we'll probably have minus force
and a minus reset.
And a minus reset, and with this, people no longer have to
Yes.
toggle, enable, disable, and hope that it was okay. That's great.
Oh, all of those changes. Oh, I'm just curious. They don't quite get us all the way to where we can remove the feature flag, do they?
What feature flag?
For drift detection?
Oh, that was discussed earlier. I think the feature flag is going to be removed, but you will get an opt-in per Helm release object. So it's no longer the controller deciding it, but the operator deciding it, but the actual user on a per object basis. So it's also not all or nothing. Yeah, the problem I still see is just that there is so much uncertainty around what charts do, and then specifically what they do in hooks, like weird mutations.
You don't want to get into an upgrade loop is the bottom line. And if someone is using a hook in the wrong way, or if you're just not aware of the hook, that might get you in an upgrade loop.
There are also pre and post upgrade jobs where people run kubectl edit, and no matter the hooks, that makes everything a continuous drift. So what we said before, what we discussed before, is we want to let end users decide instead of having a single, switch in the controller. You will be responsible for enabling a diff in your Helm release object, but you have to do it explicitly. It will not default to true or enabled, or however we are going to call it. You have to go in there and enable it yourself in the same way you do for, I don't know, force supply of the customization, or I don't know, prune, right? By default, it does not garbage collect anything. You have to go there, and this will be the same.
Like that.
What we are discussing now is adding 2 annotations to the Helm release that can be controlled from the CLI, where you do flux reconcile Helm release minus force, and even if you hit the maximum number of retries, force will run it one more time. And another one called minus reset, which will reset the retries back to 0. So people don't have to use that hacky way of disable, enable, and so on.
Didn't know that was why that worked too, the generation. That's neat.
Yeah, it's a side effect. We never intended for that field to have that behavior, but here we are, and yeah. Hide as a takeaway, could you create the issues for minus force and minus reset in Flux to repo?
Yeah, my plan is to get the PR up to get the rough controller wiring done, and that's just the wiring. And then I will file all the PRs for the further improvements, like also around the logging and the annotation options, the diff kind of change, all the things. But I want to have a controller wired so that we can kind of have the full sheet to start making those improvements on. Also because I think once I have the controller wiring together, other people can do those tasks as well, because the whole kind of structure is there. So I will first spend time on finalizing this, and then I will create the issues so that we can collaboratively work on it. Should be sometime next week.
Cool. I think it's important to have, dedicated issues for even if things that are already implemented in dev, we should still have issues, because even if it makes it to dev, that doesn't mean people can use it and so on. And I want also to enrich a little bit the roadmap and promote these features there in the roadmap as well. And if we have individual issues for them, it will be great, even if we close them all through a single pull request that you make or whatever. But having it separate, I think it's good for, I know, visibility and transparency to our users, what they are getting.
Yeah, I understand. I can also create some, I can also backfill some issues then around the observation model change and the technical details around that. And yeah, some of the other major changes. I think also like the structuring I did is, I think it doesn't make sense to everything. It may specifically make sense to controllers that are written around CLIs, but I think the structure that I have now, which kind of does an API to CLI model to reconciliation model kind of separation, is really neat. And it wouldn't work for the source controller, but you may be able to look into it for further customized controller or Timoni controller kind of things, because it's a really nice way of actually doing things.
Yeah, for example, what customized controller does with the health checks, right? They could definitely, if let's say the node where customized controller runs goes away for various reasons, and when that happens, customized controller runs the health check. It will crash, of course. It will not update the status. It will spin up on a new node. And instead of just doing the health checks, because that's what was left for that revision, it will do the dry run, the secrets decryption, the server-side apply, and the dry run will say nothing changed, and only then it will run the health checks, right? Which is not ideal. So yeah, if we document what you did here in Helm control, I think it will be beneficial for future improvements to customize control and other things.
I think if you go through the code, you will actually see that it's quite a lot to read. I think it's more than 8,000 or 9,000 lines of code or something. But literally every kind of separate element is documented, and the whole reasoning behind why something does this, why something does that, is also documented in the commits. So if you want to take a quick look further than just, okay, we changed it because now this allows us to translate it to from an API object to an action to an observation to kind of an execution model. Spend some time reading it, and start with the action package, then move to the reconcile package, and then you will see that slowly makes sense. I'm going to drop now. I'm over time, and my dog is looking very anxious outside.
Thank you very much for the overview.
No problem.
Bye. Hey, Sunny, Sule, can we talk a little bit about source controller around Helm GA? So Hide gave us an overview of what will happen with the Helm release API. What about the Helm repository and Helm chart APIs? The reconcilers are refactored, right? We have the status, which is good. We have the documentation, which is also good, but we still have things like, I know, Sule, you were working on the
Yeah, on the
insecure field.
not the insecure. Sanskar is working on the insecure field, so we can use plain HTTP when we talked with the registry. On my side, I'm working with custom certificates. Make sure we
Custom
can have a custom CI when we talk with the registry. Yeah, Sunny was reviewing that one. It's blocked at the moment, but it's on hold also because Sanskar is introducing the new cert certificate in the API. So I'm waiting for Sanskar to finish. Then I will make changes on my PR and I will ping Sunny at that point.
Sunny,
Another
yeah, go.
another related thing I had discussion with today was making Helm repository OCI static. Right now, that reconciliation doesn't do anything; it just tries to log in if it's relevant. But whatever it does need not be done. We don't really need it to reconcile anything. It's not doing anything. It stores the authentication details, but doesn't do anything. So I had a discussion with today to change that before Helm GA.
Are we going to just set ready true and that's it when you create it?
Well, we cannot do that because well, we cannot say that it doesn't do anything because what it does is it checks that we have everything needed for authentication, but it also tries to authenticate to make sure that the credentials we have are okay to be used for authentication. And if you want to do contextual authentication with the provider, the Helm repository checks that as well. So we can't just say we have everything needed and it's ready.
We have seen, so if you provide wrong information to Helm repository, it'll say it's ready. But when Helm chart tries to pull it, it fails.
Yeah.
So it's not that helpful. We can just move the authentication to Helm chart where it actually is using the things we are providing. Sometimes it's like false positive. It says it's ready, but actually it will fail.
Yeah, well, I think we would need an RFC for that because when we introduced OCIs, Helm OCI, we stated that we wanted to keep the Helm repository and add the type OCI because the repository was there to make sure we have the repository and everything needed to make sure the endpoint is okay, the type authentication, and then we have the chart part that is doing the actual chart reconciliation. We decided to split that. If now we decide that actually we don't need Helm repository for OCI, I guess this is the complete change and we would need an RFC.
No, we need it. It's just that we'll not have the reconciliation. It'll be there. And I think in the current code, in the current code, it doesn't check if OCI repository is ready. Doesn't care about a condition. It will just continue. So we don't even have to put ready condition.
It can't check because let's take, I don't know, ECR, for example. You push your Helm charts to ECR. In the Helm repository type OCI, the URL will be ECR. So how can you actually verify if you can connect to it? You can't because you don't have the name which is in the chart, right?
Yes.
You just attach authentication or a hint to how authentication can work by using a provider, AWS, but the actual, we never try to connect to it because we don't have enough information. We don't have the full URL of a repository, because the full URL of a repository needs the Helm chart name, and it's the Helm release URL / the Helm chart name, and only then you can actually say, yes, it's working, I can pull it, I can list tags, I can do whatever. What I'm really concerned about is the same concern I have for removing status from alert and provider, but that's less of a concern there. But here is like a huge concern: the fact that all the integrations that we have out there on top of Flux expect for every single source object to have a status, and if we do not set the status based on some field in the spec, now it's like if type OCI is there, status is gone. So if you start without type OCI, like most people do, they use some HTTP repo, then they realize, oh, this doesn't scale, maybe I should move to a container registry. Then they update the URL and the OCI tab. All of the sudden, what we are going to do is like, okay, we are just going to delete the status. And all the integrations out there will fail because everybody will wait for ready to move over.
That's an issue only if you have your custom client. If you use the what's the library status?
Case
There's a
status.
library, right? Cases library, right? If you use that, if it doesn't see anything, it'll assume it's ready.
Yeah, I'm not talking about cases. I'm talking about, you can search on the internet and see what people are doing with it. There is a project made by Fidelity, which orchestrates Helm releases and so on, and they use source controller and they rely on ready status. They do a bunch of stuff with it. There are many, many others out there.
I think maybe it's like because you see everywhere conditions in Flux, you assume it will be there. I think it need not be that way.
Well,
And maybe because we did.
Yeah. So the way people, I assume, use Helm OCI today is I have a Helm repository that is pointing to ECR, Azure, or anything. And once the Helm repository is saying ready, let's say I need authentication. It's not a public one. I need authentication. I have a Helm repository with authentication. And once it's ready, for me as a user, I believe it means that my authentication secret and everything I provided to the Helm repository is okay. And then I can use that Helm repository to reference several Helm releases, so several Helm charts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there are other things on top of Flux which create a Helm repo, wait for it to become ready, then they create the Helm releases. So they do it in like 2 steps. And we are going to break all of that. We are also going to cause a bunch of confusion for everybody that has built a UI for Flux. Because they show status and conditions there.
We can tell them, right? It's not like once we have introduced something, we cannot take it away.
How
They,
do you even know who they are to tell them? I mean,
so if they care, they will come and see, right? It's not like we introduce something, we cannot break anything. It's not like goals will be one promise. We will change, they have to adapt. Like users of Helm controller, they will break now. And they will come and adapt.
Yeah, but I'm still at comments. If you don't use the Helm repository, what happens? Like when you declare a Helm release, like I have a chart, I declare a Helm release. What happened then? So for every Helm release, I declare like I need Nginx. I declare a Helm release with Nginx that I have in one of my registry, and the authentication part would be still in the Helm repository.
It will be. So you have to change how you think about these static objects. They are just container for storing some data. And
Yes.
using it, you can refer and find out what you need, where it's stored. It has authentication details. You can refer it and get the details yourself.
So it will be like a config map with all the fields that I need.
Similar. It will be like a config, right?
Okay.
And this
Yeah,
will
but,
apply to
it cannot be, because if you change type OCI or if you delete type OCI, all of the sudden the same object will have a status.
That's fine. So we have decided
Why
to
are you
use
saying
one
that's
object.
fine? To me, it's not fine. It's unpredictable behavior.
If you go that direction, you can say more things about how Helm Postgre OCI works. You're intentionally deciding, like even if you use Helm CLI, Helm OCI behaves differently from traditional Helm charts. They're not exactly the same. So why do we need to do that here? People need to understand when they're using Helm OCI, it's entirely different. Behavior will be different.
Well, there were discussions at the beginning. We wanted to have one object, one COD for OCI repositories and Helm OCI. Then we decided that for the UX wasn't fine, and it was better to go with the Helm repository with type OCI. So now if you want to revert this, I think we should first have an RFC stating why you want to do that.
Can have it. I think initially we didn't have deep understanding of how it would be. After a few months, we understood what happens if you use it this way, and we can change it. That's okay.
Yeah, another feature that is more and more requested for the Helm release API, instead of having to refer to instead of having to create a template for the Helm chart that refers to a Helm release, to a Helm repository of type OCI, instead of having all of that, people want to not specify any kind of Helm chart, just reference to the OCI repository object that knows how to pull Helm charts and make them available, which drastically simplifies the whole thing from an OCI perspective. You don't have three objects, a Helm release, a Helm chart, Helm repo, which now, let's say on Helm GA, the Helm repo for OCI is just a static thing, has no status, no nothing. So instead of having a static object, a dynamic object, which is the Helm chart, and the Helm release, you'll have Helm release and OCI repo, which resolves, does the authentication, downloads the chart, and so on, and also can move based on semver, so you don't lose any of the features currently in the Helm chart, where you can say, I want automatically upgrades of patches and everything. OCI repo already does that. So we could consider also doing this and allowing Helm releases to refer OCI repos directly. And I don't know, when Helm v4 will be a thing and they completely remove the HTTP repo and so on, we could get rid of Helm chart and Helm repository and have OCI repo as the single source for everything that's going on in Flux, being customization, Helm releases, I don't know, other things in the future. So yeah, we for this discussion also need heed about that. Could be a way out, and also simplify also the debugging and our code as well, right? Instead of three objects, just to no more two pieces of code to verify signatures. Like we did so many things to maintain the Helm way of things and our own OCI Helm of things, OCI things, right? For customization and so on. if we can. And now we've added this layer selector to OCI repository some time ago, and I've tested what if you can create an OCI repository with the layer selector, and you put there the media type, the Helm chart media type, and it like works flawlessly. It's like it doesn't alter it doesn't change the tar in any way. It doesn't even do an untar. It just takes the tar as it is, like the chart, and that one gets to Helm controller. So even the magic flags that Helm has to the tarball, everything is there. We don't touch it. But we lose one thing. We lose the feature where inside the Helm chart spec, you can switch between values and replace the default value with another default value inside the chart and so on, which basically does a whole rebuild of the whole chart. And that's not something that OCI repository will ever do. To never rebuild things, because then the signature will not match, like the digest will not match, and so on. So
I think we have the code for that, because
swapping the values. I'm not saying we don't have it. Of course we have. What I'm saying is not right to do that in the OCI repository object to allow, because OCI repository has nothing to do with Helm.
It's
So
not immutable.
why would you add something that can swap files inside the tar? Is like it, right? So that's why I think we should rediscuss this topic. I don't know, in 1 week, 2 weeks with Hide as well here, and get his opinion on this. Maybe we can, I don't know, to prepare for this, we can deprecate the value switching in V1 and then do a V2 where we completely drop Helm repository and Helm chart and use OCI as a direct reference in Helm release as an option first, and later on deprecate these APIs. But if the future of Helm is OCI, then for us, it means we can actually have a way better thing around it, right? OCI repo and Helm release, and that's it. And yeah. Okay, so Sunny, you are saying that we should think about making, before we make Helm release V1, we should be thinking about doing the static stuff, which I think this is a major change. So maybe it would be good to synchronize with Helm release V2 beta 2. We could do a Helm release V1 beta 2 as well, or beta 3, sorry, because I think it's already beta 2. It will be beta 3, where we have the status is gone and so on. Any other? So one change, Sule, you said one change to the Helm release will be, we'll have a new field in the Helm repository, a new field for referencing TLS certs.
Yep.
And that completes, also helps with RFC 004, which Sanskar is working on. And from you, Sunny, is the removal of status. Okay. Okay, cool. We are waiting.
There are a lot of related topics I have to discuss, maybe not today, regarding metrics collection. We had a discussion before, right? We do about metrics. You don't have the reconciler. Remember? So I looked into group state metrics, right? Group state metrics, right? That's the project. Right. So the way it operates, it operates like a controller. It opens a list watcher. So I think we had a discussion previously where I was not sure how it works, and maybe you'll get metrics late. But if it uses a list watcher, it'll immediately get an event of any updates that's happening to a static CRD. So it's equivalent to running a reconciler that's just collecting and reporting metrics. But it will be a big change to Flux as a whole. We will have no inbuilt metrics for certain objects, and we'll have to recommend group set metrics. We'll have to provide some configuration.
Yeah.
I think it's okay because we have give Prometheus metrics configurations that we distribute, right? People use that to monitor Flux. We can just add, and by default, that deploys group set metrics as well. You can just modify that to also configure group set metrics to what Flux static CRD should be.
Yeah, but for hand release, it will not work because you have OCI and non-OCI, and these metrics will overlap with each other.
Even hand release.
Helm repository. When is non-OCI, Flux will do the metrics.
No, that's fine. So so for that, we'll have, for hand repository legacy, we'll be reporting metrics. But for hand repository static OCI, it'll be in group set metrics.
So you can create a watcher for objects with certain fields in spec. Ah, okay.
You can say like, you want spec this value or status this value, and only those will be exposed in the group set metrics.
Okay.
But I have to try and understand how it works. But I've seen the code.
That will remove a blocker in my mind for the static proposal. If we can embed that in the configuration that we tell people, hey, this is the official configuration of how you can monitor Flux. If we can add some configuration there to cover for the static custom resources, then yes, we are moving closer to the goal of having this, because it's no longer a blocker in my mind. If we actually can offer people a replacement with no downsides. If it's a watcher, as you said, it should react immediately, and you shouldn't feel any difference between Flux reporting it or this thing watching it. Is quite, Flux watch is also a watcher, so it's no difference in a way. Cool. Okay, let's end here. Thank you very much for the discussion, and we are just getting started with Helm GA. We should try to do more meetings about it, and my goal is in a couple of weeks to everything that to update the roadmap and have their explicit issues, and also showcase users what they are getting from Helm GA, because we talk so many things and it's all in code, and yeah, we should strive for transparency and promote all the work that we've been doing. Yeah, that's it. For today. Thank you very much, guys.
Bye.
Oh,